Oh, we are live. Man, that was quick. Okay. Welcome, everybody, to the backstage. And it's great to have you with us. I'm Jimmy Dodd, and I serve on the Pastor Serve team, where we strengthen the church by the fact that we serve pastors. And we love to pastor pastors, and we care through coaching and strengthening. And I'm joined today by my good friend, Mindy Calaguire, who has been a dear friend for a long time, as she is the director of soulcare.com. And she's one of the big shots on the glue team. And we're glad that and she looks like she's on her way to the Oscars today. She dressed up for us today.
It's Oscars week, so maybe
it's obviously a very special day for Mindy. I don't know why. It's a little hurt that she never dresses up for me, but we have Pete, and then she comes in and she's got on the pearls and everything else. But we're joined today by our very good friend, Pete Scazzaro, and we're thrilled that he's with us today. And the first question I would have for you guys is, when you go to restaurants, do you use your name if you guys wait in line? Because you both have one of those names. That's a little bit hard. Or do you say that we're Smith or Williams? Because if I had your last names, I don't know if I would use them in restaurants if I was in the wait line. It's a little complicated.
Jimmy, when my husband, Jeff, proposed to me many, many years ago now, like after he proposed, it was a romantic moment and I said yes, and we're crying and all the things. The very next thing he said is, now for the rest of your life, you get to say, that's Caliguire. And he wasn't wrong.
They should have just gone with your maiden name. It would have been so much easier, right?
It was a little bit easier and kind of fun, but doesn't work that way apparently.
Okay, so I'm sure that everybody knows Pete. He has been at New Life Church in Queens for the past 26 years, which I want to guess makes you a Mets fan. And Pete, because you get to say this like once every 26 years, I'm going to say it, the first place Mets.
Don't even follow the Mets.
You don't? Okay. That's just, in baseball terms, that just struck. Well, you know what? You're in first place. You should celebrate that, because that won't last long. And it's one of the few times that the Mets have been in first place in a long time. So the fact that you're in Queens, that would be. But I'm sure that you all know Pete, because he's written lots of books about emotional health. He wrote The Emotionally Healthy Leader, The Emotionally Healthy Church, The Emotionally Healthy Disciple. And Pete, I'm praying that you will write The Emotionally Healthy 16-year-old. And I need that next week. So if you could work that out, that would be all right. That would be great. But God has used you in great ways, because there has been a piece of the church that I think for a long time was just not actually talked about. We didn't talk lots and lots about emotional health. So we are just, I just think that this will be a great day. By the way, this is all part of a team called resilientchurchleadership.com. And so right now, if you would call your friends and text your friends and say, hey, you know what, right now they've got Pete's on, and they'll talk about just things about your life and emotional health. That would be extremely great, because this whole webinar is not just about the front stage. It's very much about the backstage. It's about those things that lots of times that we just don't actually talk about, but those things that are so extremely important in life. So Pete, you've spent decades and decades trying to just help pastors pursue just things about emotional health. Why is this so important to you? And how in the world did this whole thing even start for you?
Wow, that's a couple of questions. I mean, I got into this again through the back door. I wasn't looking for it. Basically, pastoring my own crisis on a personal level, and my own discipleship, recognizing that it was shallow, wasn't sufficient for church planting. At this point, we're planting churches here in New York City. And, but our church really hit a wall. Then I hit a wall. My marriage hit a wall. And everything I'd learned at the good leadership conferences and seminaries just wasn't cutting it. So out of that wall and crisis, and I also realized people were not changing very deeply in our church. And we're in a multiracial situation here in New York. And, you know, when you get into issues like race and class and gender, and you're hitting some deep areas. And it was very obvious that we weren't going to be able to hold together as a multiracial church without a much more serious formation, discipleship. So all these things kind of converged. God met Jerry and I really in our marital crisis at a therapist's office where it actually kind of began, and really launched me on a theological journey of, we've got some big missing pieces in our discipleship. And so that's where I spent the last 26 plus years working on the missing pieces of discipleship. And it's called emotionally healthy discipleship, but it's kind of an umbrella term, much like I'm sure Mindy, like soul care is. But it really is, I think our contribution is getting at what we call the missing pieces of this in discipleship, that are a combination of what we call, if you think of us as made in the image of God, emotional components, things like our family of origin, limits, how we deal with relationships, making love the measure of, spiritual maturity, and a contemplative spirituality, a slowed down spirituality with silence and stillness and Sabbath, and really drawing from the riches of monasticism. And it's really the two things together that I think gives our work and our kind of our research and development out of a local church, it's punch. So it's been unfolding. We're still learning, we're still very much in process, and but it's been a wonderful journey. Slow, of course, like anything involved in formation and discipleship. But I think our contributions, a local church, how do you change the way the church functions as a church, that we actually make disciples who actually are full enough to multiply into other people. It's not just about a crowd gathering, on a weekend service, but very much about doing serious discipleship that's not shallow, deeply changing people's lives out of which they go into the world. So again, our work is primarily theological and integrating things that normally are not integrated, and developing tools for leaders and churches and pastors.
Great. So it's a long issue. It's a thing that we've had this big need for a long time.
Yeah.
But for some reason, your books felt fresh. They felt new. It felt like they had this new perspective. So what do you think that you brought that was like, okay, this is a thing that we know that we've had a need for, but this is different. This feels authentic. This feels real. Can you just kind of dive a bit more into what you brought, just kind of brought that freshness?
I think simplifying things, and I think developing some practical tools. Jerry, my wife, I think we've been on this journey together. We're both research and developers, but yet we're pastors, we're leading a church, and so in a sense we had a laboratory that was a local church, and one with 75 different countries in it, which was very helpful in terms of international, racially mixed, but an environment that was very open to anything. So again, we can bring in silence and stillness for 20 minutes a day. Just doing creative things that you normally couldn't do probably in most local churches. I think New York, the kind of craziness here, just whatever. And then I think Jerry and I going on a journey of saying, because we were evangelical poster kids. And Mindy, you can relate to this, right? We were like, we did everything that you were supposed to do, and we almost crashed and burned. And we have many friends who did. So I think it's out of that, the level of pain that we were in when we had done everything we were quote supposed to do. We lived in Central America, church planting, evangelism. We were just like, InterVarsity staff workers. We were like, hey. And so when I think we realized what we were missing, we came so alive. It was like, we realized, oh my gosh. And we just discovered like these major things. They weren't like minor the issues, like a verse that we were missing over here. And this was like major. For example, like how your family of origin over 3 to 4 generations impacts who you are today. That's pretty big. The fact that the criteria for a mature Christian is how you do relationships, how you love enemies, how are you approachable, are you safe, are you non-defensive, are you humble? That was like a rat, even though it sounds so obvious. Like at the time, we were so into building and making it happen, and we were so used to you looking at the people on stage. That was because our marriage wasn't working. I mean, she wasn't experiencing me as a more loving person, and the more the bigger the church got, the more irritable I became, probably. And so, again, these contradictions. I didn't do feelings, didn't embrace limits. So and then just, so we began to develop skills on how do you break this down, because our church, like every church, schooled in a good evangelical, or charismatic tradition, had a very narrow discipleship paradigm, extremely narrow. And so we had to wrestle with, we're evangelicals and we love Jesus. We're into the best of our tradition, which is evangelism and mobilizing people and bringing Christ to the world. However, we needed to learn from other traditions that were very different from us. So how do you do that in a way that people don't get defensive and all freaked out about? That was really, so I think by doing that work kind of in our own context, it forced us to do some, really good, I think, biblical work and a lot of study. I mean, just in terms of church history. So emotionally discipleship is going to expose you to a lot of things. I ended up going for a doctorate in marriage and family, just because I wanted to figure out how do we develop some, for example, relationship skills, so we can disciple people in their relationships. That was a radical thought. How do you have a clean fight? How do you speak clearly, respectfully, and honestly? How do you go back and look at your family of origin and how it's impacted your marriage, your sexuality, the way you view gender? So it was taking people on a journey that was very intense. And I think people's lives began to our lives were dramatically changed. And we just began to, we just kept focusing on the few in our midst and then bringing it out. But, it was interesting because I think of Mindy, when we first met, we were involved, we got involved with Willow at the time, and they wanted us to reproduce what we were doing really quickly globally. And it was just I remember Gary was leading at the time, the association, said, why can't, I guess this doesn't work because in a year you can't reproduce this in Great Britain or, Malaysia. And I was like, no, you can't, because if you don't live it, you can't bring it. And it just didn't work because, again, the model is it has to be really reproducible quickly. And that's our tradition. That's American Christianity. And I think learning from monks about prayer and silence and stillness and mustard seeds, I mean, we've been immersed in that for a couple decades now. And in fact, Jerry and I just had a conversation before our time here in the podcast, and we're going to do a cohort in the near future. And we just said, without people immersing themselves in serious silence before God, they're never going to get rid of the junk that's filling their lives. And we've got to make this so central from the get-go, not a visit of silence, but this has to be a central part of what we do, and they get into their lives, or else it's not worth even investing our time in with these folks. So, it's this unique combination of emotional health, things like genogram and skills to learn to do relationships differently. And then with the monastic stuff, it's not just throwing in a few Dallas Willard spiritual disciplines. I think for us, it was really the riches of this radical spirituality of like the Desert Fathers, we've all got to leave the way we're doing life and radically restructure our lives to get to Jesus, because otherwise we're just skimming and just doesn't really go anywhere. So it's not a small solution to a big problem. It's kind of a long range, big answer to a big problem.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So Mindy, you're like the expert as far as soul care and soul health. So we have emotional health, we have soul health. So are those the same thing? Is one kind of underneath another? But how do soul health and actually emotional health connect? Because we have no idea. So we're excited to hear from you.
Well, and I'm not the expert on soul care. There are many, many past, present, and there will be future experts on soul care.
But Mindy, you were the first to buy the website, so that makes you the expert.
Fine, Jimmy, fine. With all the authority vested in me, because I purchased a URL in 1998, I will gladly offer my perspective. And it has been delightful, Pete, to get to know you over these years and see the really impactful work that you've brought to leaders, yes, globally, maybe not as fast as some organizations might have wanted to turn that crank, but I think your style of writing has literally hit a raw nerve into the body of Christ, and particularly among leaders. And that like if anybody knows that feeling when you have something that hits a nerve and just like everything in you is arrested and paying attention, and your stories, your communication style, the authenticity of it coming out of your own journey and your church's journey has had that effect of hitting a raw nerve, which is just compelling, and many leaders are finding great help and support in life through it. So I'm glad that starting with leaders and churches, now you're moving into the pews, so to speak, with what's a way to bring this vision of a Jesus-centered life, and whatever it costs to get there, into more and more people's hands. So that's very exciting to me. When I think about the connection, and not, ranking per se of emotional health versus what is soul health, my view of the soul is that it encompasses and integrates all the dimensions of personhood. We've read this in Renovation of the Heart and other places, and those dimensions are far-reaching. They're our mind, our will, our spirit. The mind encompasses emotions and thoughts, and which are far more connected to one another than anyone ever really knew. The more neuroscience we're learning, the physical body, our social context, the things that Pete's talking about with how we love being a key indicator of our formation into the image of Christ. So if you think about the soul in that really, really broad context, and you think of soul health being sort of then quite comprehensive among all those dimensions, emotional health is a portion of that. But you could argue, and I think it would be fair to do so, that it is an especially lacking area for most of us in the evangelical context. And so to highlight it, showcase it, and then create the really powerful experiences and exercises, the skills that Pete and Jerry have worked on, so much really powerful material is structured like at one of the weakest points of soul health. So I don't know if that's a helpful way of thinking how I think of them, but I think of soul health as a very broad category, and emotional health being arguably one of the most important dimensions or drivers of overall soul health in our context right now. So how does that resonate with you, Pete?
No, I think that's good. In fact, actually, I like that. Because it really fits with I mean, I love all your stuff, and Run of Array is all tremendous stuff. But I think you're right. That's probably why our stuff kind of has had such a huge resonance, was because we first started this emotional health thing. I went back, like Jared and I met God in the therapist's office, and we're like, oh my gosh, And so I went back to my professors at seminary, and I had the world scholar in Augustine. I'll never forget. I remember being in class with him, and him saying, "Oh, all you Protestants are hung up on sexuality because you're all Neoplatonists." I never knew what he was talking about, And I went back to him because I wanted to understand how I got into this mess where I almost self-destructed, And then I went back to my Old Testament professor as well, and saying, "Help me understand, like, what happened? What theologically, like, how did this happen to me?" And ended up basically saying, when you think about the image of God, there's different aspects. We're whole people. You can't cut us into compartments, but there's different aspects of that God image in us. We're relational beings, like God relates 3 in 1. We're intellectual beings. We think, God thinks. We're spiritual beings. We have the ability to commune with God. We're what am I missing here? Social. We're relational beings. We're social beings, intellectual beings, and we're emotional beings. And he goes, and Augustine popularizes Neoplatonist attitude with it, kind of like in broad strokes, that the body is bad and the spirit's good. It's kind of over spirituality, and so that's why we don't deal with sexuality very well. And he goes, it goes way back. It's real, and it's deep in Protestantism. And he goes, and so you're just a product a long history of a theology that's very narrow and ignores the emotional component. And I remember when people would talk about it, go to 12-step groups, and it was always being talked about, even in my younger years, but no one ever got into it. So I didn't write anything for 7 years. I just said, I'm going to dig into what it means to disciple people just in that, if we just took that one component. And so actually I spent my first 7 years just didn't write anything, didn't speak anywhere. I just that's when I got into things like, family of origin, genogram, going back 3 to 4 generations, and really studying and again, biblically, things like limits as a gift from God, and just what were the component, grief and loss. We have a whole book called, I remember I wrote a 25-page exegesis paper on one of the laments of David in seminary. Imagine the original Hebrew and all that, but the professor never made a connection that we need to feel our losses. I didn't feel any loss. I was just like type A go guy, and I didn't do feeling. I just did anger, And so, but I mean, so unlike David. But the connections were never made. It was, I said there was such a, and even being disciple, and how do I be a married person? I was just doing what my family did. So, so many connections weren't being made. So that was my early work, and I think that's. And in Zondervan, when the book was first published, said we don't want to put emotional health in the title because no one's going to buy it. No, especially men, no man's going to pick it up. And I said, no, it's a theological point I want to make, that it's emotionally healthy discipleship that we've got to address here. And then what happened, in all of life, you end up having, it's not just one area, it's everything. It's slowing down your spirituality. It's, you end up in all the areas because everything's related. But the tip of the spear was the emotional health one for us. And I think as I look at other ministries, and so I got asked that question yesterday by a megachurch pastor, why is it that lots of people doing the contemplative thing, slowing down, but very few are doing an emotional thing? And why do you force these two to be together? And I like what Thomas Keating says, he's a monk, he says, you can't get to your full self without the contemplative, and we'd say, yeah, you need the contemplative to get at your full self, and you need some other biblical hooks to get at it as well. Sometimes you need therapy, but you do need that contemplative piece. So I think there's something, the next generation, I think our popularity is really with young folk, which is really interesting. It's Gen Zs, it's millennials and down under. I mean, because they're just so hungry for some, they're so done with the way my generation did church, and they're just so hungry for something experiential, broken, authentic, connecting to real life. So that's been a big surprise to us. I think we just kind of, as the publisher said to me, you just happen to hit a word that, even though nobody wanted it 25 years ago, now it's like the buzzword, and I said, it's interesting how that happens,
Yeah. So if you're just now on, this is Backstage. We're on with Pete and Mindy. Let me just say that, you know what, actually, if you have a question, I think that there's a chat little button right there. You can just click on that chat button. So Pete, this past year has been a hard year, obviously, for pastors, because they feel the weight of all of these different things. They felt the weight about the election and COVID and racism and so many issues. So it feels like you have a lot of pastors whose gas tanks have just been depleted emotionally. It's been a hard year. So what things would you say to those pastors that say, man, this past year has drained me emotionally, and it's just also drained my staff, it's drained my people, and I don't even know what would be the first steps to get back towards emotional health, because we have been discipled this past year, but we've been functionally discipled by Twitter and by the evening news, and we've been functionally discipled by all of these things. And so I hear all the time, well, I haven't ever been actually discipled. And you want to say, oh, no, you have been discipled. But it's been functional discipleship.
Yeah.
It's not been a good thing oftentimes. So what would be some ways in which you could help them understand discipleship that would bring some health and some life to them?
I think it's revealed, the last year has revealed the shallowness and the inadequacy of our discipleship. It's put the pressure of the birth pangs, the repeated birth pangs of crisis after crisis after crisis, which shows no sign of abating, actually. It is revealed for example, our reliance on big meetings to feel good about ourselves, right? If we got a crowd on Sundays, you're like, oh, well, everything's good, you know. People are in small groups, at least they're connecting, you know. When we've got a crowd on Sundays, the finance is good, and you know, my life's getting better, my kids are good, and it's like, you know what I mean? It's like that's what people are like. It's like this veneer that we accepted just got pulled out, and so it created a sense of crisis. I think even the polarization politically just has torn churches apart because we haven't discipled people on a level that we can have difficult conversations. We don't know how to do that. So we have red churches and blue churches. People choose churches based on politics now. Yep. And that's so tragic. And our church, and part of the church has been co-opted by the right and the left. I mean, so it's just so interesting how it's such a reflection of, again, I call it the Americanization of Christianity. And so it's been a moment of awakening. And I would say that it's a gift for us, because how we follow Jesus up to this point is not sufficient. So we do have to do some retooling and re-equipping of ourselves and our leaderships and our people to be able to, how do you live in this kind of world? And how do I follow Jesus? And I think the early church, when they developed a catechumenate, for example, they had to develop some structures and means to ground people in Jesus, because they were having, waves of persecution would come periodically. You had all these Christians lapsing, and it was a enormous problem for the early church, because what do you do when they want to come back, but they're half in, they're half out, and they had to develop, some serious discipleship in the early church. And I feel like we're at that stage right now. As I mentioned, your work and soul care is so important, and I think God is raising up a number of people. We're just one of them, but I think it's a new day, and I think the church is going to shift away from large to more micro and more serious, more community, real community. And I think there's a door open for us, actually, for the church, because we have so much influence in the American church, and we have way too much influence globally. And with that comes some responsibility, and I think we've been very sloppy about it. And so I see the scandals, the crises, as God speaking to us, God's invitation. I was telling at one church yesterday, a friend of mine, I said, they want to get over this crisis. They're in a crisis, kind of a scandal. And I said, I know you want to wash it, you want to get rid of it and end it and close the door and just move on. I said, but you may miss what God has for you. I said, God is trying to change you and speak to you. And if you just close it up and move on like nothing happened, you're not going to receive it. It's like the pandemic. How do you grieve? What do you do with 560,000 people who've died? Just let's move on if the pandemic's over. Like, how do we grieve that? Again, we don't have a theology for grief and loss. So that's so what a problem. People just want to get back and grow their church again and get people in small groups. And I know some pastors I know one pastor quit a large megachurch. He goes, I can't believe that we're going back to life as normal. And he goes, I'm not going to give my life to 1 hour a week. It's just not worth it. And to get people in a room for 1 hour a week life is too short. And this is not going to make a change for what we need.
Yeah, and it's not the bigger hope of what this moment could offer to us as individuals and to us as the church. I love what you were saying about the contemplative practices and how essential they are to making the kind of progress that I think we all desire, but it's never been part of our sort of way of imagining how growth would take place. Certainly not the central place that you're describing. And I, in talking to church leaders over the last week, a couple times it's come up. I am zealous for that different way of life to become a normative experience for leaders. And it seems so impossible from where we are right now that we could get there, but I'm impatient. I'm like, I don't want to wait 20 years to see the story change. I want this different in 5 years, that people are really radically rearranging their life based on their life with God. And in particular, the concern I have and the hope I have is that my view is only from that place, and I think all of us here, it's only from that place that people are able to hear from the Lord, what is the next invitation? What is the next, like you said, I know the title needs to be this, even though it flies against all conventional wisdom, but you knew that it needed to be different. It needed to highlight the thing that everybody was embarrassed to talk about. Similarly, what are the courageous decisions that need to be made in this season that just cannot be made from the place of distraction, dealing with all the, current drivers and measures of success? And I'm jealous for leaders who have been anointed and called by God to enter into this way of life so that we have something to offer to the world. Yeah. We have something to bring into the really hard challenges that we're facing in the divisions, the polarization, everything else. Like, please, people of God, how can we show up differently in that? Not from striving or figuring things out because we're so analytical, but from a place of intimacy and connection with the living God. And man, that's the first thing to go when your schedule's too busy.
So can I ask Mindy a question, Jimmy?
Absolutely.
So Mindy, you deal with a lot of pastors and leaders. So how do you, when a person comes, I'm pastoring a church, my life's out of control, I'm just overwhelmed. Where would you say I would start? What would you do with me to kind of get me on a track? I don't know where to go. I've been deeply formed in a bad way. Okay.
Yeah.
And I've got this, I've got this, in a sense, crack addiction to doing.
Right.
And I can't imagine how I could get off it with all the pressure and all the stuff to be done. What would you say to me? How would you?
Yeah, that's where Jimmy knows that I talk about soul health a lot. Pete, if God would give me a better way to do it, I would change I would try to do everything I can to meet you or anyone else with a message that feels compelling and clear and something they can move forward on. But the first thing that I've found helpful is helping people think about the symptoms of what I call soul health and soul neglect. And I find that I kind of, this is us talking, amongst all of just the three of us here and everybody listening. But I find I don't like to activate definitions. Like, I talk about soul health and soul care as long as I possibly can without trying to differentiate. Okay, here's how we define the soul and here's how we define this, because my experience with a lot of us as evangelicals is if we think we can define it, then we have controlled it and we now understand it. And that's like a grand illusion. And so by telling some of my own story of deep brokenness and how I ended up completely jettisoning the well-being of my soul and had pretty severe physical symptoms for a season. And I came out of it like kind of feisty about not wanting to live the way I had been living, because I felt like you said, I had done all the right things. I'd done everything you're supposed to do. And it landed me exactly in a very predictable, in hindsight, mess. And so I didn't know another way. I just knew I didn't want to go back to that. And so that led me on a path of trying to learn to care for my soul. So in sharing some of my own story, which, as with you, people then can hear themselves in that. I was a church planter. I was doing this. I went to all the right places, blah, blah, blah. But soon after that, sort of setting up this idea that you can have a head full of the right, at least current thinking, right theology, and land yourself in a place of complete mess, that how is it that can be the case? And then sort of teeing up that possibility, because then everybody's going, oh yeah, that's me. And then by, bringing it to John 15:5, remain in me, you bear much fruit. Apart from me, you can do nothing. What part of nothing didn't you understand is what I heard the God say to me when I was flat on my back, could not stop puking my guts out, could not get out of bed for months.
Wow.
And I was like, what part of nothing didn't you understand? And, Pete, this, Jimmy, the everyone listening, there's a lot about nothing we don't understand. Psalm 139 tells me there's nowhere I can go that's away from his presence. Even if I go to the far side of the sea or make my bed at the gates of hell, even there your hand will guide me. And then the New Testament, Romans tells me that there's nowhere I can go that's away from God, right? Neither height nor depth nor angels nor demons or anything in all creation can separate me from the love of God. So what on earth did Jesus mean when he was saying in the most important conversation right before he's fundamentally shifting the way they're going to relate to him forever, and it's recorded there because it applies to all of us? What did he mean? Apart from me, you can do nothing. Is he saying to them, they might lose their salvation, they'll be disconnected from him? Why did he return to the theme several times? It actually was a lot of nothing I didn't understand. And for all the things I don't know, I have no PhD, Pete, I don't have a theological degree. For all the things I don't know, that metaphor of a vine and a branch, I can get. And we are grafted in. There's a sense that there's a wound in the vine that opens space for a wounded branch that has severed its connection to its original source and is now receiving its life. And lately I'm consumed with this idea of like, if you could zoom in with a microscope to that very point of connection, and how does this branch receive its very life from a vine? What does that look like at a molecular level? I'm fascinated by that right now. And what does that mean for us to receive our life from God? And then from that life, we can do whatever we want. The fact is we disconnect, not fundamentally. God never goes away, but we turn. He's not gone. It's us who's gone out for a walk. Do you remember who wrote that? That's a funny quote. I don't remember where it's in. I don't know. It's there either. It's not that God has gone away. It's we've gone out for. I think it's Meister Eckhart. Anyway, we are the ones who turn away. And so much of Jesus's words to us is about relational in nature, Pete. It's like return, come, be with. It's not memorize this or be really strong and resolute around this. His words are all relational, to come and receive life. That's the invitation. So anyway, I do that exercise. That was longer than I meant to say.
That's good.
But I do that exercise with groups because then we talk about what are the symptoms of disconnection. Nobody means to disconnect. It's benign neglect. Nobody sets out to trash the well-being of their soul, especially in ministry. But it happens. We forget about God. We go 3 weeks. We're planning meetings. We're preaching messages. But we haven't had that moment of, oh, you're with me. I'm fundamentally well. I am in your good care. I am receiving my life from you. We just get running and gunning, and we forget about God, and we forget that we forgot. Yeah. And so when I do those symptoms on a whiteboard, kind of like that, and just like, what are symptoms of when we've lost that real time in the moment connection? And a whole set of things come pouring out of whatever group it is. And then I turn it around and say, when was a time that you sensed real nearness with God? And like, not did you know a lot, but you knew that God was with you and for you right there in that moment. And then I asked them what flowed out of you. And those are symptoms of soul health. Those are symptoms of connection. And the contrast is unbelievable. And I don't have to convince anyone that that's the case. They just told me. And they recognize themselves in that. This is finally getting to the answer. They recognize themselves in that, Pete, and they start to go, I want more of this. Yeah. And then it really, Dallas Willard's VIM, the vision, intention, means. When that vision is, they just have to reconnect with it. They've all experienced it at times. They have to reconnect with it in a visceral, emotional way. And when they do, the intention and the means, they take care of themselves. I can still offer spiritual practices, ideas, etc. But if I anchor too much there, it sounds shrill and chirpy and like I'm the prayer girl, right? You should just go pray more. Like that's not the spirit of soul care at all. Yeah. You might pray more, but it's a vision for life with God and receiving our life from God and flowing out from that place. So anyway, I don't know if I answered your question, but that's where I always start with leaders. And it continues to seem to resonate for people. And that's the vision that keeps me going. It's like why I sit quietly in my mornings with a cup of coffee, because I need to detox from the drivers that have driven me. It's not like I'm done.
Absolutely.
Good. That's very good. So Pete, I could just hear actually pastors saying, yes, I long for that, but I'm in this cycle about production that is just so hard for me to find practical ways just to slow down enough, just to really care for my soul and my emotional health. So what would be some very practical things that pastors could do to just take some very practical steps towards that soul health and emotional health?
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I listening to Mindy, I'm thinking, yeah. I mean, it is like being on crack. Okay. And because you're on a roll, and I was on it, and often it takes a full crisis to get you on your back. Yep. Right? Like Mindy did. Myself too, I hit a crisis, but I'm finding that young leaders don't need a crisis to get there because they know something's wrong, and you don't need a crisis. There's other ways to do it. So if I'm starting with someone, again, I'm probably thinking a lot more at this point, very systemically. I'm like, I gotta, I'm understanding this is a very long journey, and it's like Jesus and the 12. Depends on my relationship with them. You got the 3, and you got the 12. It's gonna. You need the slow, small, one-on-one thing to really get in people's lives. But if I'm doing something broad, I'm gonna probably start with Sabbath, slowing down. See, the issue is if they're not willing to slow down, I can't really help them very much. So if you're still working a 70-hour week and you're so busy, you're preaching sermons, you don't even have time to gestate them yourselves. I was with a couple of young millennials, early 20s. I'm sorry, were they? Z's, I don't know, but they're mid-20s, pastors already, but they were juggling so much, and they were saying it's not my season. We were doing discovering the rhythms of daily offices in the Sabbath, okay, and they said it's just not our season. So the small group, the table leader brought me in and said, "Would you talk to them for me?" And I was like, they're saying they don't. It's not their season. They were all very highly accomplished. Manhattan, a number of them in Manhattan, just Ivy League schools, thinkers, starting nonprofits, pastoring a church. I mean, it was just like, and I started talking about, you're not God, first of all. We got into the whole issue of the practice of Sabbath. I said, first of all, you don't have to do anything. It's like prayer and Bible study. You're saved by Jesus alone. But Sabbath was made as a gift for you. All right. And just like if you're not praying, you're probably not growing very much. If you're not reading the Bible, you're probably not growing very much. I mean, you're saved by Jesus alone. But I say the same thing. If you're not taking a weekly rhythm to just stop and rest and delight in God, you're probably doing way more than God's asking you to do. It's a gift for you. So I said, your season. I know people who are in trailer parks in Florida at 70, they don't have any time either. They're so busy. Okay. And they're retired. Okay. So it's not, you're never going to have a season. But the question is, why are you doing 4 full-time jobs at the same time? So where's that all coming from? And, in terms of identity, and then we're talking the whole theology of limits. So, the whole thing in the Bible about limits and how limits are a gift. And I went to the Garden of Eden, and God sets before Adam and Eve a whole garden, says, take whatever you want, eat from whatever, build civilization. But this one tree right in the middle of the garden, don't touch it, and it's a limit. You're not God, and trust me with it. And of course, they crossed the limit. And I said, Jesus in the wilderness, that the issue was limits. The devil put before Jesus these temptations to cross limits, right? And get it done quick. And he obeyed the Father, trusted the Father, and waited. John the Baptist embraced his limits. A person can receive only what's given to him from heaven. And he decreed, his ministry went down. That's why you can be succeeding and your ministry is declining. And you can be growing and your ministry is actually a failure. So the question is, are you doing what God's called you to do? And so I just got into the whole issue of limits. They had no thought about limits. And it was a great discussion. I said, I think the issue really at core is a biblical issue for you. And if they're married with small children, on top of that, I said, well, I said, obviously it's your relationship with, you have time. They do time with God on the subway. Okay. Because got so much going on. That's all I got left to do. And I said, well, and you're trying to pastor a church out of that. I said, that's not probably enough of a cup that's overflowing.
Right.
To be leading a church. It's going to be you can only give what you possess. So I would just, every issue has lots of you're getting all roads lead to Rome. And it's amazing how one issue, like how do I slow down, ends up touching on to all kinds of other issues. And that's why, discipleship is, as Mindy said earlier, it's your whole person, it's your whole life. This is everything: your marriage, your sexuality, your singleness, how you parent, everything, how you prepare sermons and how you listen to God. I mean, it's just, so we're talking about something's fundamentally, Jimmy, as you dealing with pastors too, is fundamentally wrong in the way we've been formed.
Yeah. So I think that we have a mindset oftentimes, I hear from especially young pastors, well, I have these gifts and here's a need and I can meet that need. Therefore, I'm called by God to meet that need. And I will say, that's terrible theology, because that's not how Jesus functioned. Because you space, there's so many passages about limits. I love John 5 because Jesus walks in to a multitude of needs, right?
True.
Multitude of needs. Jesus could meet every need. But from all we know in the text, he goes to one person, takes care of one person, and then walks over needs that he could meet on the way out and doesn't meet those needs. And I doubt that night that Jesus said, oh man, what was I thinking? I should have stayed there all day and healed everybody. What was I thinking? No, the Spirit led him to one person. Jesus could have met every need. The needs were right there, but yet Jesus didn't feel like, okay, that's now my calling to meet every need. And yet pastors feel that way. They feel like, no. If I'm there and I've got the gifts and there's a need, I've got to meet that need. And that's terrible theology.
Yes.
Because that was not Jesus's theology. Jesus was led by the Spirit. So it's okay. We need to be so much more in touch with the Holy Spirit to continually ask him, is this a need that you want me to meet? Yes, I could meet that need, but maybe that's not the need that you've called me to meet. Maybe it's okay if I leave because it's 5:00 and I go home and I'm with my spouse, and maybe it's okay if I'm with my family and there's some unmet needs and I don't have to go home with that spirit of regret of, gosh, I could have stayed and met every need, because that's not how Jesus lived his life.
Well, a question here from Kristen is, how do we fight burnout in the midst of constant pressure to bring results? It starts to feel like we're swimming upstream all day, every day. Walking away isn't an option for many pastors as they're not trained in another field. No, the issue is redefining. We define success wrong.
Yeah.
And I think the young pastors, I thought the young pastor would have it differently. They don't. They're as messed up as we were in our generation. They're just, idolatry looks different. But again, success is not bigger, better, and up and to the right.
Right.
You can have a small church and define success by numbers in a different way. It's all, but success, and numbers are in the Bible, but success, and here's my definition, is becoming the person God calls you to become. That's one. And then doing what God calls you to do in his way and in his timetable. So those little phrases at the end are very important, because doing what God calls you to do in his way, in his time. I can do what God's called me to do, but I was always rushing it. Okay, I wasn't on his timetable. Okay, because I had a need to look like something else. So if you're feeling pressure from all these external forces, that's been going on since the beginning of time. I mean, look at Jesus was under enormous pressure. Because behind those temptations are demonic powers that want to squeeze us and get us out of God's will. But if you can redefine success inside of yourself, I'll call it biblically, that no, I want to become the person God's calling me to become. I want to become more relaxed, more tender, right? More kind, whatever that might be in your case. Am I growing in that? Which normally we don't even ask ourselves that question. And then secondly, am I doing what God's called me to do? And so, it's funny, I was talking to my wife this morning, it's like, you can get invited to speak at a big conference, and there's so many reasons to go, versus, okay, I'm going to have this mentoring meeting with these 4 pastors here instead. And I just said, boy, and I have a young friend who went to this thing, and I was like grieved, and I said, it's really hard to see it. Because again, I don't know if it was good or bad for him, but I know for me it would have been very bad to go. But they're defining success. What's God asking me to do? And getting clear on that. You're a free person, a free woman, a free man, and you're offering a gift to everybody you're leading. So they may want you to be something, but you know, it's not like that's not what they need. They need you to be free, which is this is why it takes so much time to get your soul straight, because it takes a lot of reflection, a lot of alone time, so that you're actually hearing the Father's voice and not being swept away by the enormous needs or the voices that are asking for good help. But it doesn't mean that you're supposed to meet that help. Like I realized, oh no, I'm not supposed to meet that need because God's got somebody else to meet that need.
Right.
Why am I trying to meet that need?
Right.
Actually, you know, Sabbath, you take a Sabbath, not just for yourself, you take a Sabbath, the world needs a rest from you. Okay. Let the world off the hook.
Good.
God will take care of it way better if we'll stop. I like when we die, things are going just fine. God's got things in the palm of his hand. So there's another way to do this leadership thing that is really an easy, light yoke. Doesn't mean there's not suffering, but it's going to take, going from our seminaries or our Bible schools, the way we're doing leadership conferences, there needs to be such a revolution in what we're feeding leaders for the future, because there's no way. There is just, if anything the last year has shown us, there is just no way that old wineskin works.
Yeah.
I mean, it is. So do we have the courage to change? And it's going to take some courage. It's scary because we don't really know what it looks like. And you just get, you got to feel our way, and we got to all be like this. Oh, like Eckhart, you might share Eckhart. I am totally unattached to everything. So, right, I may lose my job. How about that? And I got to get my, I'm going to get myself a what do you call it? I'll be a tent maker for a while. But whatever it is, I'm attached to nothing. I'm not clinging to anything. I'm empty in a sense. So that God can birth what he wants through me. That's freedom. Yeah. But it takes a while to get there. And that's the inner journey out of which the outer journey flows. I just think we're so focused on the outer journey that the inner life gets skimped on. Yeah. We just kind of get, it's not really time to pay attention to it.
I always remember at the end of a day-long session teaching through these kinds of things that we've been talking about today. I could just tell the group, and again, a better teacher might have served them better than I did, but I found a look on their faces collectively that if I was like, what is this? You probably have had that where you finish something and you're like, wait, what am I getting here? What is this? What am I feeling? And the image that came to my mind was the feeling maybe that Jesus had when the rich young ruler went away sad. Because I think everyone I just spent the day with is going away sad. Because I told them basically, this won't cost you everything or anything, but it'll cost you everything. The invitation, as you said, Pete, is to an easy yoke, a burden that is light. And if that's not what you're experiencing, there is another path. And the things that we're talking about, that Pete's written about, that others have, that ancients have written about, is available. But it might feel like we're saying, oh, it's no big deal. Yeah, you can enter the kingdom. All you have to do is sell everything you have and come and follow me. And, as pastors, often we sort of snub our noses at rich young rulers who we deem aren't willing to walk away from their fortunes. I'm not saying this is my personal journey, but it's kind of the vibe I think we have about, oh, the rich young ruler. Oh, he's a rich young ruler. She's a rich young ruler. And I think a lot of people in ministry are rich young rulers who can't let go the way you're talking about. And sometimes they don't have the first right next step, right? Sometimes, Jimmy, you've heard me talk about that you need a page, a person, and a plan. Mm-hmm. That's my latest, I like that. You need a page, you need to enter self-reflection. You need to have an honest way, a non-judgmental environment to reflect and in a journal, however you do that, but you need a page to start assessing, how is my soul? Why is it this way? why are those, how many different threads are connected to why I can't seem to make headway here? But a page, you need a person. I know, Pete, you've seen spiritual directors, counselors. We need coaches, others in our lives who are journeying with us, who can help be that mirror, who can provide encouragement. I used to say our small group, these women and I, we're like, God was doing open heart surgery with no anesthesia. And our friendships were the things that helped us stay on the table. Like, just don't give up while God's still doing surgery. I know it feels like there's no anesthesia, but just don't get off the table yet. We'll hold your hand, don't get off the table. Or they were holding my hand. So you need a person. Could be highly qualified and trained professional, could be a peer, a ministry peer, but you need somebody. We talk about that many times. A page, a person, and a plan has nice alliteration, but that's where you start saying, what is my rhythm with silence? What is my rhythm with Sabbath? What is my rhythm with some of these vital practices that have been throughout the ages so essential to our transformation? So anyway, don't walk away sad.
Yeah. No, it's good stuff. You know what I have found that the best way for me just to slow down in the morning is just to preach the gospel to my own heart. And one of the main things that I preach to myself every morning is I just go back to John 1:20. I am not the Christ. I am not the Christ. I can't fix this. I can't fix people. I can't fix situations. Lord, let me believe that. Let me believe the words of John the Baptist. I am not Christ.
Jimmy, that is so good.
It's such a basic, it's just like, Lord, let me believe this today. Because
is that your life verse?
Far too often I think, no, I can fix this. No, I can't fix this. I can't do that. That puts crazy pressure to work crazy hours and to go to great lengths. Like, no. This is about Jesus. It's not about me, it's about Jesus. So, okay, last question here. So, there's a lot of pastors that want to care for the health of their staff. So what would be just a few things that would be practical that you would say, okay, I'm going to give your lead pastor, if you want to care for your team, you could do these things. What would be just a few very, very practical steps? That's for both of you, right? That's for both.
And you go first. You want me to go first?
No,
you go first.
I'll go first, and then because we can wrap with you. The first thing that comes to my mind is like care for your own soul. The best thing you can do for your team is make sure that you yourself are living out of the overflow and allow, as we've been saying on this call, what is God inviting you to? What is he asking you to do for your team? I don't know for sure what that will be. There may be really practical things that you feel led to do, but once again, so quickly as leaders, we're trying to figure out how to help everybody else once we realize a topic is important. And my caution to a senior leader would be, before you inflict yourself on your team and trying to help their souls, do what you must to make sure your own soul is well cared for. So that's where I would start.
Great. Pete.
Great. Boy, I'm thinking I can think of like a lot of places to start, but I probably would start with right now. If you're just starting the whole thing, I would probably invite you to pick up the book I just wrote, Emotionally Healthy Discipleship, because I wrote it for pastors and leaders and teams, to what a new operating system needs to look like in the church. And so it was kind of like my culmination of my last 26 years of saying, okay, because my really vision is we do need a new, think about it, you're going from a Mac to a PC, or PC to a Mac. It's a different operating system. And the present operating system we have is just not sufficient, doesn't have the bandwidth and breadth and depth to get at what we need to get at in terms of formation and leadership development and discipleship. So I go at everything from my starts with be before you do. We got to, how do I structure a life of being out of which I do? Because if our being is not sufficient to sustain our doing, we've already lost the game, Then a second is we follow the crucified, not this Americanized Jesus. We get into that whole, what does that look like? Mm-hmm. And then embracing God's gift of limits, another big theme. And then grief and loss, receiving God's treasures in grief and loss. So getting us making love the measure of spiritual maturity, that radical shift. So they're large blocks. I feel like for pastors and leadership teams need to start thinking about the whole operating system, because we're not tinkering here. We're talking about a radical shift that must start with you, and then to your team, and then you bring it to the church. But I want to invite pastors, please don't bring to the church what you're not living. That does more damage than good. That's so right. Slow it down. There's no rush. God's not in a rush. Again, we cannot give what we do not possess. We can only give who we are. And so it's not a clever sermon. It's your life that you want to give. So my great passion is slow it down. I got a bunch of, exercises. We got a lot of free stuff on our website we offer to people. But at this point, I know that I got to get a lead pastor and a team thinking like, this is large. This is a complete shift that's going to probably take 7 to 10 years to make here, beginning with me. It's going to be slow, and give them some anchors, I think, of looking at it for the long haul. Otherwise, they get started, they feel a little bit better, and that's it. Oh, my spouse isn't complaining as much. I'm feeling a little less calm. I'm off my meds. I'm feeling a little better. We're looking for a little larger change than that in terms of your own discipleship and formation, out of which you lead the church.
Wow. So good. Pete and Mindy, thank you so much for your wisdom and your insights. This has been very rich and very, very appreciated. Friends, this is The Backstage. We're here every Thursday. So come back next week, because we talk about things that are very, very much about the soul. We talk about emotional health, because the backstage is such a critical place. It's oftentimes those things that we don't talk about, but we have to, because it is what is killing so many pastors and leaders. They don't want to talk about the backstage, but we have to go there. And so I'm very, very grateful for this time. So thanks so much, and we will see you next Thursday. Blessings.
Bye, Jimmy. Bye, Pete. Good to see you.
Thanks.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.